G'day, friends, and welcome back to the show. My guest for today is Andrew Zerner. Andrew wears many hats. He runs his own beef cattle trading enterprise in the South Burnett with his wife Katie, and he also does a lot of consulting work with RCS and his new business, Knowledge to Practice. I first met Andrew a few years ago at a 3-day grazing clinic that he was teaching in Mergen, and I can safely say that he is genuinely passionate about education and teaching within the ag industry. He's got a wealth of knowledge to draw upon, being a fifth generation dairyman who transitioned the family business into 100% beef cattle trading. And I think also just the pure amount of grazing businesses that he's worked with and consulted, he has a really great perspective on what the top performing grazing businesses are actually doing. So in this episode, you can expect to learn how Andrew facilitates rotational grazing on undulating land, advice for kids that want to come back to the family farm, and why he will never ever drought feed. So I hope you guys enjoy the episode, and if you get any value from it, feel free to leave a review.
Work and sometimes this is how I handled it last time, but that might work, so you modify that or
Change things around a little bit.
Change things around, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me, Andrew. I appreciate it's a busy time of the year.
You're welcome, Cam.
Yeah, so I'd describe you as being passionate about education within agriculture. At least that's kind of how it comes across in the presentations that I've seen you give. Where did the love for the industry come from? Did you grow up on the land, or how did that look?
So I did grow up on the land. So we're on the family farm here where we're recording this. So I'm fifth generation on this bit of country. It's been in the Zerner family for 100 plus years now.
Wow.
And was a dairy farm for most of that, for about 97 years.
Yep.
So always had a connection to the land, always very passionate about ag. Apparently, I wasn't so keen at being a dairy farmer though. Like, my mum tells the story of when I was, I wouldn't have been at school yet, and I said to her, "Mum, look, I really want to be a farmer, but I don't want to milk cows. You know, is that possible?" I knew nothing else besides milking cows, because between here and town there was only dairy farms and bush, and so I had no concept. So she assured me that yes, there are other types of farms out there.
Other things you can do. What did it look like after high school, or whenever you did finish schooling? Did you just stay on the farm, or did you go away, study, get experience in other places?
Yep. So I was always keen to come back to the farm, even though it was dairy at that stage. And I went away to uni and did a degree in rural management, applied science rural management. And with that, when I went, a bit of advice I got from my father was to go out and learn to grow stuff, basically. So we were, with being in dairy, we'd grow fodder crops. So it'd be oats through winter and lab, and sorghum through summer. So it was go out and get that skill set to be able to bring that back if you're wanting to come back to the farm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what you could bring back. Yeah. Because this area used to be just all dairying, didn't it, back in the day? And did you guys sell to that the co-op in Mergen? Is that where you'd sell the milk?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sad to drive past that building. A nice old building just going to waste now, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the building's been repurposed, but you're right. It's this country through here, it was it tends to be quite fertile and so made reasonably good dairy country. However, with the changes in the industry, within the dairy industry itself, things became not quite as profitable, as well as when you throw in different extremes with weather and events, because like from a dairying perspective, you need to produce milk 365 days a year, and to be able to constantly produce that. So if we think about wanting to work with nature and being able to match stocking rate to carrying capacity, some years we have wet years, like we're having a wet year at the moment. Some years we have dry years, and so we need to be able to adjust the number of animals we've got to what grass we're growing.
Yes.
However, with dairying, it was we need to be punching out this milk every single day of the year, and so that proved a lot of challenges.
Yeah, you needed that consistent production. Have you noticed since you growing up here that the seasons have become more volatile, like they are just an extreme on one end?
Yep. So a good example of that is if I like we've got close to 100 years of rainfall records, and with that, the calendar average rainfall, the calendar year average rainfall, it's got wet years and dry years, but it's overall it's somewhere within this range. However, I think it was 2013. We had, I don't know, it was something like 250 mils overnight. So,
Yes.
10 inches overnight, that's a lot of rainfall. I went back through rainfall records, and I couldn't find a single event that there was that much in a single fall.
Yes.
Or even over a couple of days.
Yeah.
But since then, so that's only just over 10 years ago, we've had multiple events of that amount of rain overnight or within a day or so.
Yeah.
So, that's one thing that we've seen, that the total amount of rain may not have changed a big lot, but how intense it falls definitely has changed.
Definitely.
Yeah. The other thing too is just with temperature.
Yeah.
So Katie and I, we've been married now for nearly 28 years, 27 years, thereabouts. And anyway, when we were first married, like we've got a ceiling fan in the bedroom, and you may put that fan on once or twice through a summer. That would be it. Last summer, I think there was only about 3 or 4 nights for about 3 months that we didn't have the fan on.
Yes.
Like it's just so much.
Just change.
It's so much warmer during summer.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like there's a middle ground at the moment. It's either extreme dry or just extreme flooding, wet events. Maybe just going back a little bit quickly, when between graduating and coming back to the family farm, were there any jobs that you had in between that you think were fairly pivotal, where you can look back on now and go, yeah, like that definitely has made me a better manager or contributed to me being a better manager today?
Not that I can think of in particular. I'd always planned when I'd finished uni to go work elsewhere. I was thinking in the lines of ag economics. So whether it was with ag banking or something to do with profitability with ag in general. So that had been the plan. However, for a few different reasons, I ended up coming straight back to the farm when I finished uni.
From uni,
I did a little bit of travel here and there, but came back to the farm. It was dairying, and at that stage we were moving into growing silage, and it was basically a semi-feedlot dairy. So we would grow our fodder crops for grazing, summer and winter, and then we'd also grow silage and cut a fair bit of hay, as well as buying a heap of grain and concentrates, protein meals and molasses, etc.
Yeah.
And so something that's really interesting that so it was quite high input, diesel, seed, fertilizer, chemical sprays, control weeds, etc. So I've had a look at the bringing animals back, like our dairy back to a standard animal unit, so bring it back to a large stock unit, an LSU. So the number of LSUs we were running during those dairying days compared to now with no inputs, it's actually about the same.
That's amazing.
So we high input, we could run so many animals. As soon as we stopped dairying, which was about getting close to 20 years ago now, So the number of animals we had to drop right back, but now we've been able to build that up over the past close to 20 years now.
The number of beef animals.
The number of beef animals, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
totally a beef operation now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you came back, so you came back straight after uni, did you know that when you came back that you wanted to stay here for good and that you wanted to take it over? Or was it kind of like a transitory period where you were not sure yet whether you're going to take it over?
For me, I was fairly certain I wanted to be here. So one of the things that I've probably known most of my life is I wanted to be my own boss. Always wanted to be able to do my own thing. And so when I was here, when it was dairy, it was basically a 2 full-time labour unit operation. So it was myself and my father, with a bit of as my father got older. So basically it was 2 full-time units. Once we stopped dairying, which was due to change in the dairy industry as well as prolonged drought, so we knew how much feed we had. We knew exactly how much silage we had, and it was a fairly failed crop. So we knew we had 6 months worth of feed and that's it.
Yeah.
And so therefore we were able to have a staggered approach to be able to drop out of the dairy industry and go into beef. So going into beef operation then, it's basically a half-time labour unit. I'm able to run this operation with only half my time. So I started working off farm, and I guess by working off farm and working for different companies, all tending to be related to ag. At times it was good for a lot of reasons, a lot of growth and personal development. It also became quite tricky at times with hierarchies or with organisational charts. Well, whose responsibility is it? And now on a farm, if it needs to be done, you do it.
Yes.
And so that can be tricky at times, I found.
Yeah. So you did come back to the farm, but then I guess through still doing your consulting for RCS, and that's kind of, well, it is like working for someone else and getting experience with all those other farms you consult with. When you knew you came back that you wanted to take over one day, what did those conversations look like with your parents? Was it, I guess, succession planning? Was it just a matter of stating your intentions, what you wanted to do, and just early conversations?
Yes. Kind of.
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. So mum and dad knew that I wanted to come home like that. There'd always been conversations around that. So the way we were doing it, I was brought into the farm partnership. So parents owned the land, and then with the business itself, the actual dairy business, I became a partner in that. And then to be able to transfer that next bit then was quite tricky. Looking back now, knowing what I know and the work I do with RCS and working with people, all the rest of it, it would have been fantastic if we'd got an outside facilitator, someone to come in to be able to help that conversation through.
Yeah.
Because like some of my least proud moments in my life is conversations or arguments that I had with my father. So yeah, that wasn't pleasant. And we got through that.
Yeah.
And however, it could have been handled so much better, so much better. So my advice is, if you're going through succession, which if we're on the land, all of us will have either been through it with our own folks or with our kids, and it may not be with our kids, with someone else. So start conversations early, get help, get someone to come in and help that conversation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did that experience give you a really good perspective now when you go out for RCS and you help other people work through that? You know how it could go, and then you want to help people avoid that, and do it a different way?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So something that we've done with our kids, and we've tended to do it. So my kids now, they're in their early 20s, and during high school, so early high school, we started having conversations about the farm is here. If you're interested in wanting to come back to the farm, that's fantastic. If you don't want to come back to the farm, that's really good too. We'll support you in whatever that looks like. However, if you are coming back to the farm, what are you going to bring to the party? Like, really encourage the kids, go out, get experience, try different things. Maybe build some capital, or to get extra skill sets that would be able to benefit the operation here.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you're wanting to come back to the farm, it can't, like I said before, we're half a labour unit.
Yeah.
I'm only working here half my time. So what else are you going to be doing if you're coming back to the farm? What other, it would be possible to stack some other enterprises more intensive, maybe some paddock to plate, maybe, chickens, pigs, whatever. There could be opportunities there. Yeah. However, you'll have to come up with those sorts of things. With succession, I think it's really important to go out and get someone who can help you have conversations. Yeah. Like, we can have, and with succession, there's a whole team of people we need. Yeah. So we need some legal advice, we need some accounting advice with capital gains, with some financial planning stuff, and then we also need some type of facilitator with people skills, because we're dealing with people. We're wanting these relationships to prosper during the process, as well as after the actual succession.
Yeah.
And I think what I try to tell people with finding the person that facilitated to do some people type stuff, it's a bit like dating. You might have to go on a few dates first before you find one that you connect with, that you can connect with, you and your family can connect with, and feel comfortable having the conversations that need to be happen.
Yeah. Awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I know there are so many young folks out there that want to come back to the farm, but they're just not sure how to negotiate that and how to make that work. So I really appreciate you sharing those pieces of advice. So with the dairying, you kind of hinted at it, but because what you're doing now, I'd say, is probably, sustainable, regenerative, in that way. Were your parents, that way inclined as well, sustainability wise, or as you kind of alluded to, it was a very high input dairy style situation?
Yep. What I think my parents did really well was continuously learn. Not so much courses, but Dad was always reading. So, back before the event of podcasts and YouTube, he would read. He would buy ag magazines, and not just dairy magazines, and some of them were international ones that he would just be reading and getting little bits of ideas. He'd go along to field days, and some of the first advice I got from it was either from my dad or from my grandfather, was about, if you're going somewhere, what are you going to learn? And it doesn't matter if you're going, like the topic for the day is on grass species. It's driving in and out. How have they done their fences? How have they done their gates? How have they done? What are you going to learn? What conversations are you going to have? So always being curious and always learning. I think they did that really well. Mm-hmm. And then as far as if you want to talk about working with nature more, sort of a regenerative slant, I think Dad was quite open to it, and so I guess if I add in here, so I went to uni, straight out of school, went to uni, and we learnt what you learn at. So I went through GAT, and you learn about plants and animals, and plants and animals and chemicals, and this is how you farm, and this is how economics works, and heaps of these different things. And at the same time I was at uni, I'd read an article about Terry McCosker, one of the founders from RCS, and everything he said in that article made sense and was talking about grazing. And I think that's, so I did my first courses with RCS 25 years ago,
Wow.
thereabouts. So in the middle of dairying, going along doing some grazing clinics, doing the 7-day Grazing for Profit school. It was called something slightly different than the one I did. However, it was coming from the dairying industry, we were already used to shifting animals. We knew we had a really quick feedback from every single milking. You knew with what you had done in that last day or the last 24 hours, what sort of effect has that had to milk production? So we had that quick feedback. So we knew animals going into a new paddock always produce better results. And so we would be, the daily operation would have been, we would milk in the morning. From there, cows go out onto oats or lab.
Yep.
Then they'd go into a grass paddock. Then they'd come back. You'd milk them in the afternoon. Then they'd go into a night paddock at night, and like that would continuously go. And then once we started getting into the semi-feedlot, there would be a shift going into to the feedlot itself to be able to have that feed before they went into a grass paddock or onto feed somewhere else. So we knew kind of that side of things, that going into a fresh paddock was good. We knew about feed budgeting as far as with our oats, say. We knew that this is how much oats we're growing at the moment, and we're wanting to continuously have some green feed every single day. So therefore, okay, could they go in for an hour, or is it an only half an hour feed on oats?
Yeah.
Because by the time we get round all those paddocks, back to the first one, that has to be regrown because we're wanting to go onto that straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were, well, I mean, it seems as though a lot of the early adopters of, intensive grazing management were dairy farmers. Like whether it was New Zealand or down south, they seem to be ahead of us quite a bit up in the north. But so there were definitely some grazing practices that you were doing on the dairy cows, which transferred when you guys shifted over to beef cattle. You were already doing the electric fencing, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't always know why we were doing it. We didn't know some of the foundations behind why we were doing it. So I think that was, there was a number of aha moments there, just looking at, with how grass grows. If we think about, 3 phases of grass, we've got small grass taking a while to grow and then getting up bigger and maturing and then into phase 3. And it was kind of, we understood that as far as oats, and we could manage that, and we were getting appropriate rest in our oats country. But why weren't we doing it with our grass country? Like it was, like we had a rotation, but rest was just way too short. So, once I went away and did the grazing stuff with RCS and came back, it was okay. Well, those night paddocks up there, they can be day paddocks too, and some of these day paddocks, they can actually be night paddocks. So just having more paddocks in that rotation, being able to stretch that rest out, that was a bit more appropriate.
Yes. Yeah. So you were doing it, and then when you did the first RCS course 25 years ago, everything kind of clicked. It made sense a bit more.
It made more sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still had very few paddocks per mob because we had so many mobs with dairying. You had your milkers, you had your dry cows, you had your springers, the ones that are about to calve, you had, and you probably had about 3 different age groups of replacement heifers. So all of those, they might have, the replacement heifers, they might have had about 4 or 5 paddocks that they rotated through.
Yeah.
So then when we changed from dairying to beef, all of a sudden we've only got 1 mob and we've got 20 or 30 paddocks. And so a lot of the development, that initial development was there, that we could utilise the paddocks we had.
Yeah. So why don't we dig into that a little bit? So 20 years ago, you went out of the dairying, and you went into 100% trading cattle, or did you have a period there where you were doing the cow calf, or it was just straight into trading?
We went straight into trading, and I think the reason we started that way was we had been, when we were dairying, we started recognizing, we have wet years and dry years, and so in our wet years we've got this excess feed, so we started having a small mob of steers that we would trade, and then in dry years we wouldn't, like, or an average type year we wouldn't. So we were already doing a little bit of trading in a few years prior to us actually finishing dairying.
Right.
And then, like you were saying, there was a lot of dairies through the area, and a number of them, when they stopped dairying, they just put a beef bull over their dairy cows, and transition that way. What we chose not to go down that path because the dairy industry was still there was still good money to be made from selling dairy cows. So we decided to sell these high producing cows,
Yep.
to another dairy so that they can continue their life there. Some of them went straight to the works. So so therefore we started trading.
Yep.
We've never really looked at breeding. However, with some of our trades, we have traded cows and calves, or traded dry cows or PTIC cows.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love having those. I think they're a really good tool to have in a grazing operation, in a trading operation, because when we have big years, we end up with more feed. Then it's pretty hard to get the volume, the number of cows, or the number of animals that we need, the number of growing animals we need, and so we have this extra feed. And I think cows, full sets of teeth, all adult teeth, big rumen, they can really utilise some of this feed. So that's the way I tend to use cows, and I think cows will tend to always be part of the mix. Like at the moment, we haven't had any cows for 12 months now. However, with the season we're having, I'd be very surprised if over this next 12 months we don't have a mob of cows going around and kind of resetting some paddocks and it'll be very strategic as to which paddocks we'll go into with that mob of cows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool that you guys were kind of dipping your toe while you still had the dairy mob, and then you were kind of practicing or starting small with the beef cattle trades. So are there any other advantages that you see with trading over breeding? Like, I know you've obviously got your other commitments with consulting. Does it help reducing the labor units?
Not so much. I don't think so much having to reduce the labour units. I think it's quite easy. It makes it easy for me to match stocking rate to carrying capacity. I've got animals. I know how many. I know how much grass I've got. I know the season I'm having. If I need to be destocking, I can sell. Sell 3, buy back 1, type of thing. So I'm able to do that type of thing quite easily. We have tended to, at times we've had both heifers and steers, and it adds, like, there's opportunities at times trading with heifers over trading with steers and vice versa. However, like we're saying, I'm away half my time, whether it's for RCS or our new business, and so I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can, still get the effects that I'm wanting, and just having one class of animals, stock class, maybe a second class with cows at times. Just trying to keep it simple works really nicely.
Yeah. You just get more flexibility to, as you said, stocking rate to carrying capacity. So did you guys kind of use those benefits in 2019? And I'm not sure what you guys did last year, but did you just completely destock? You had that ability to just, you're gone, we're not drought feeding anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we we will never drought feed. Like we just won't do that. Like, and that's lessons learnt from the dairy industry. Like, if we have a think about it, when we went out of dairying in the mid 2000s, the reason we went out is because we were hitting another drought. We had a failed silage crop. We knew how much feed we had. We had only just finished paying off the drought bill from less than 10 years before that. We just racked up so much debt, and it just did not make any sense just to bleed ourselves dry by doing that. So we are very, very much, we will never drought feed. We can match stocking rate to carrying capacity. Some of our skill at budgeting how much feed or estimating how much feed we've got, sometimes I get that wrong. And so you were asking about 2019. So in 2019, we knew what feed we had, and we were destocking. We knew how far we had to get to have a good chance of it raining again through to the next summer. And so we were destocking, not replacing any of those throughout that 12-month period. And the other limitation we've got here is actually stock water. So we got to the point at the end of 2019 that we were just about all of our stock water was done. So we would have had to be getting rid of animals anyway. Otherwise, we'd have to be purchasing feed and water, and that just is a really sure way of going broke. So that was 2019. The interesting thing is when we have a look at then just over 12 months ago. So it had rained and then it stopped raining, and our rolling rainfall was very similar to what it was in 2019. However, the amount of feed we had, we were very comfortable with what we had. Whereas in 2019, we've been destocking, but I just didn't destock quick enough. Going back, hindsight is always great, and just destocking, a couple of decks earlier at the beginning would have made that whole process through the year so much better. Because I wasn't proud at all what the paddocks looked like at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020.
Yeah.
However, on the flip side, I was absolutely blown away at how quickly the country responded.
When it rained at the end of...
It rained, in the beginning of 2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like we've got photos, a series of photos, and basically we can see the first storm, I think it was about 80 mils in half an hour. The first rain we had, so it just came down, and you can see here the country, it's not flat. So that first storm, I was saying, oh my goodness, that's so great that it's rained, and I'm thinking, how much is it eroded? How much how much mud am I going to have in dams? All of those types of things. After the storm, I rode round, and in a couple of dams, I had about a foot of water. Some dams there was absolutely nothing, so it had gone in even though it was so steep. And then the real exciting part then was with these series of photos I did about 5 days apart. We could see we were getting nice shoot 5 days after rain.
Wow.
10 days after rain, we had about a foot of feed. So 10 days, and just looking through the neighbour's fence, sort of starting to get a bit of green feed.
Did that allow you guys to get back into the market a lot quicker?
Yes and no. The yes part is we had the feed. The no part, we had no stock water. So,
you can't win.
You can't win, but it because the country had been so dry and chewed down harder than what I was proud of. I think just having that little bit of extra rest there, letting that grass grow that little bit extra before we did restock, I think was really beneficial. Yeah.
So prior to November, well, at least around November is when I got rain at the end of last year. How did it look around here? So difference between say 2019 and the next maybe driest year was maybe last year, I'd say. Did you have to destock? No,
it was just our normal operation. Yeah. So we feed budgeting around Anzac Day is what we do here, and we knew how much feed we had. So some of the lessons that I've learned over time is like I would budget feed through till mid-December, because that's when we've got a good chance of getting rain and get grass growing rain for most years. What I've learned is I like to budget my feed through till about now, the first part of January, because if you think about it, if I've got feed to mid December and it doesn't rain and we don't have that, which it won't some years, that's just the reality. Then we've got, everything shuts over Christmas and New Year. There's no sales. Feedlots don't particularly want any animals. So just giving myself that breathing space over Christmas and New Year to be able to enjoy that. I know, even if it's dry, in those dry years, we've got enough feed. And I think that was a bit of a difference between 2019 and then just a year or so ago, when rolling rainfall was pretty similar. But we had feed and we were able to quite comfortably get through, and then it rained and we go again.
That's awesome. The difference between the two. I'm curious, with your work for RCS and Knowledge to Practice, your new business, you get to work with a lot of other operations. Is it a common theme for those that lose money during drought feeding, for them to be just attached emotionally to genetics in say a breeding situation, that cow-calf style?
Oh, what a great question. Potentially. I think that could be part of it. In a breeding operation, you're not wanting to get rid of your genetics because you've been, developing these genetics for a long period of time. So I think that is part of it. The other part, I think, potentially, is not having a plan in place. Like, we know we're in a dry continent, that some years it rains, some years it doesn't. Drought is part of doing business. We're in a grazing businesses that rely on rainfall. That's our most limiting factor. So we need to design our business and have that flexibility in our business that we can go through these dry periods. So I think having that plan in place before we get to a drought is so important, because once we're in a drought and it gets drier, it's hard mental space, headspace, to be able to, well, what do we do, or should we do anything, or just ignore what's happening? So having that plan, having some critical dates, that if it hasn't rained by here, this is what we're going to do. If it hasn't rained by here, this is what we do. So that's one lot of drought planning.
Yeah, just not having anything in place.
Yeah. Then the other thing is, with RCS, with grazing charts. So we've got our benchmark carrying capacity, and then stock days per hectare per 100 mils, so that we know that as it gets drier, that starts going up, and as that's going up, it gets to a point that if we it's nearly having like a ceiling. If we go through that, well, what are we going to do? We need to do something with this.
Yeah.
And I think that's been something really interesting, working with people, through that 2019, 2020. So coming through 2019, and then when it rained, and we'd go back looking at their grazing charts, and we go, okay, when did you stop sleeping, kind of thing. So you go, okay, well, it's at this point here, and quite often it was, okay, here's our benchmark, and we were this much overstocked at that point in time. So that's putting those ceilings in, that next time it gets dry, if we punch through that, we will stop. We will work out what we've already got a plan in place, that we will be destocking. We'll be having serious conversations about what we're doing. We'll go out and absolutely, have an unbiased opinion of how much grass we've got, even if we need to get someone else to come in and say, how much grass do you reckon we've got, can be really beneficial.
Yeah. So just as you said, when you go through that benchmark, making the decision. So genetics, the attachment to genetics might be one part of it. What are some other reasons that people might see that there's that they have far more animals than they can supply feed for, but they're just hesitant to sell?
I think Actually, we'll do a little bit more with the genetics thing first.
Yeah.
So if we've got a breeding operation, we're coming into drought, we need to destock. It is a fantastic time to make some significant improvements in your genetics, because you're just culling more of the bottom off.
That's such a good piece of advice.
Yeah, cull that off. Well, then your average of your best genetics have all of a sudden got so much better. So I'll add that bit to it. Yeah, it takes a mind shift. However, if you look at, well, what are the silver linings? What are the positives we can get out of that? That's one of the things we can do if we've got a breeding mob.
Yes.
So the other part of your question then was, what are some other reasons that?
Yeah, people might see they don't have enough feed in their paddock, but they've still got far more animals than they can handle. And they know that, but they just won't destock.
Yep. So I think part of that is okay. Well, if I sell them now, I'm going to get very little for them because everyone else hasn't sold, and then we can just see as it gets drier, the prices just follow that that same graph going down. And then if I sell them now for nothing, well, I'm not going to be able to afford to buy them back. So it comes back to what we were saying before. If we can have a plan in place, during a good season before we go into a drought, so that we get to a point, okay, we need to do a feed budget. We know how much feed we've got, whether it's this much or only this much. Well, then, if we need to destock, let's destock now while the price is still good before everyone else is destocked. If we can be in a position then that we've been able to look after our country and that our country explodes when it does rain, when that season breaks, and we've got stock water, we can actually jump back in so much more before everyone else.
Yes.
So, just trying to rethink some of those things.
Yeah.
The earlier we destock as well, the less animals we've got to get rid of.
That's true. That's a great point. The price. People just, I suppose, don't want to lose money.
Yeah.
So on the trading, you're 100% trading now. Would we be able to go through maybe just a rough scenario on, let's just say that your property's destocked, like in 2019, you had nothing on it. Is there a little bit of a process that you go through when trying to plan out your next trade to just give you the best chance of success?
Yep. So part of our trading model that we work with, sometimes it's our own animals, but sometimes it's actually someone else's animals. So agistment can be part of like we'll do our gross margin on what we could get for agistment. We can do our gross margin if we own the animals. We can do our gross margins on if we do some profit share. So it doesn't always necessarily need to be our own animals.
That's on a weight gain profit share.
With the profit share, it's on a weight gain basis. So, so actually, one of the mobs we've got here at the moment is a profit share deal. So they weighed so much coming in. When they go out in the next couple of months, we've got that weight there as well, so we know how many kilos they've gained, and then we split that weight gain.
Yeah. What percentage of the time do you reckon you're doing agistment versus your own bought? Is it 50-50 split? Always changes?
Always changes, and I think that's the always looking at having agistment or a profit share, doing the sums on that to see what it's like. So you said about 2019. When we came out of 2019, beginning of 2020, because our country had responded, we didn't have a stock water initially, but then when we did start filling some dams, because we had fantastic rain over that next month. So 30 days in, we had enough dams with enough water that we could start bringing animals back on. And at that point, not everywhere across the eastern seaboard, had rain yet.
Yep.
And so we were able to get quite good agistment rates because people were still paying really high prices for agistment.
Yes.
Or perceived as being high. So we actually went 100% agistment there for a while.
Yeah.
So it will vary the mix of how much profit share, how much agistment, or how much of our own animals.
Yeah.
I think some of the things I've learnt with trading is to keep your options open and do the sums on each of them. So that's one of the things. I think another part is always having grass.
Yeah.
So having grass, like I don't know whose comment this is, but it's the person with the grass has the power. So if I have grass, I've got options that I can get my own animals, or I can bring on agistment. And that's just something with agistment, or in particular, if we bring animals on, well, I want to be the person managing them. I'm not just giving someone a paddock and it's just continuously stocked and flogged.
Yeah.
Like I'll be bringing them on. Sometimes they'll be mixed with my own animals and we'll move them around. But I've got the management decision as to the amount of rest my country is getting, my stocking rate to carrying capacity.
Is it ever tricky to communicate with the owner of the cattle you're agisting? Sometimes that you've got to focus on the land as well, and whilst you are also, trying to put kilograms of beef on, but you're also looking after your paddock. But I suppose those agistment owners are wanting the cattle to just be flat out gaining weight. Is there ever any?
I think your comment there, it's about communication. It's got to be about clear communication at the beginning. So part of that is that, okay, I'm happy, like I know how much grass I've got, I'm happy to bring in so many animals and it is for this length of deal. So I'm comfortable with having enough feed for this many animals for this period of time. At that point, we can go month by month from that point on, so that it's it gives some certainty to whoever I'm working with.
So you do a contract.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Cool. So if you are going to look at buying your own cattle to trade, what are maybe some of the basic numbers people should be looking into, or maybe you look into just to assess whether it might be viable? Are there any spreadsheets or calculators that you use or would recommend?
So I guess early in the piece, when we stopped dairying, and we're looking at doing like, this is how we need to be making money now. Going back to that piece about continuously learning. So I'd already been doing some RCS stuff. And at that point, when we went 100% trading, like from dairying, I went and did the KLR marketing schools. So had been using some of their spreadsheets, and just that whole shifting the paradigm, sell buy rather than buy sell. So in other words, don't be caught up with how much we paid for these animals, that we're not going to get those animals, that money back. Like, especially if you're talking about that, if we're talking about that having to destock. Like that, I think that with that part of the conversation, people don't want to sell because we paid so much for these animals, and we're just going to be losing money. But look at, okay, if you offload those animals, what can you replace them with at that point in time rather than through time? So you're asking about spreadsheets. So the KLR marketing spreadsheets, and then in more recent years, I've been using the RCS ones because that's what I'm teaching. That's what I'm familiar with. I think with any of the trading, we need to bring it back to a standard animal unit. So bring it back to an LSU, or if we're working with sheep, back to a DSE, dry sheep equivalent, because we know that different size animals eat different amounts of grass. So it's you're selling this volume of feed to some animals. So what we want to be able to compare apples with apples.
So your cows, for example, would be a much larger LSU than a young weaner.
Potentially, yes. If they were,
or how does that work? Am I getting that wrong?
No. Generally, when we're talking about that, I guess for the quality of feed, yes. If we were in a winter period where the quality of feed is pretty ordinary, the weaner, like a 250 weaner, is going to be doing not much more than maintaining weight, putting on a little bit of gain, and so therefore it's not going to be eating very much. Whereas the dry cow with a big rumen and lots of teeth will be eating significantly more, be able to process that feed and be able to go from a skinny dry cow to a fatter dry cow.
Yes.
Looking at a trading operation.
Yeah.
However, if we're in peak of summer where we've got really good feed, that little 250 kilo weaner, instead of being a 0.7 or 0.8 of an LSU, putting on a kilo a day, which they could be doing about now, that 250 kilo weaner is about 1 LSU.
Wow, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
So, just being aware of what feed the animals are on as to what their live weight gain is going to be with growing animals.
Yeah. So that can their LSU rating can change considerably just depending on the season and whether they're growing muscle or whatever it might be. I haven't done a KLR course yet, but I think if I ever was to get into trading, it definitely seems like a valuable course to do. People speak very highly of it. What do you think your most typical trades look like? Do you have a preference for how long the trade is? Maybe any breeds that you think flesh out better on this place and sex, anything like that?
Yep. So the favourite sort of trade, or the most common one we do, is an animal that is a weaner that's greater than 250 kilos. I'd probably prefer sort of 275 kilos, that sort of weight range, and then turning off. So they'll all go to feedlot. So turning off at sort of 400, maybe a bit over 400 kilos live weight. So if we're talking about weights, if you go through the spreadsheets, those smaller animals, those 250, those 220, those 200 kilo animals, they look really good on paper, I found, but they just take such a long time here to put on any weight. And so, it ends up being, rather than an 8-month or a 9-month trade, it might be a 12-month, 12 or more month trade.
Yeah.
And so, I really try to avoid getting things less than 250 kilos. And then as far as breeds go, once again, when you look on paper, your black cattle, they look just fantastic. However, they just don't do as well here. Like, we're in peak summer at the moment, don't have a big lot of fly at the moment, but any animals that have fly at the moment, they're the little black ones.
They're the black ones.
Yep.
Yep.
So I try to avoid black cattle, but in saying that, I'll still have black cattle here.
Yeah.
I think the Brahman cattle or high Brahman content cattle do well here. However, there's from an economic point of view, I try to not have too many of them. Yeah. So it's generally some sort of crossbred, something to be able to handle ticks, be able to handle flies, be able to handle heat, be able to handle tropical pastures, C4 grasses.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, it seems like a tricky one, and I was talking with Jono McMillan about it out at Cinnabar, but you're absolutely right. The British Angus cattle seem to fetch more, but then how much does it cost to maintain? And then your Bos Indicus cattle, they don't cost much to maintain, but then how much can you get for them?
Yeah, it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think, it's just too much? Just takes too long for those small weaners to get started. What you found, and you're just carrying them for too long, feeding them, they're not doing anything.
Yeah, they're chewing grass, they're not doing anything. The smaller ones in the mob, they're not able, especially if we have bigger mobs, they're the ones that get bullied and just continuously just stay at the tail, kind of thing. Yeah.
Heifers, steers, preference?
Mostly steers.
Mostly steers.
Keeping it simple, it just makes it easier at the other end. When we're we'll sell B doubles at a time type thing to be able to fill a truck, and it's easier if they're all steers or all heifers, and so we've chosen to go down the steer road. Though in saying that, one of the last trades I did was heifers, and the heifers were right beside neighbour's paddock. The neighbour generally doesn't have a bull. However, this little bull jumped in without me knowing, and in about 2 or 3 days got a quarter of this B double pregnant.
Yeah, as luck would have it, you were probably away as well. And
yeah. And it was okay. Well, that sort of just adds extra complexity that I don't need. If I can keep it simple, steers don't get pregnant.
Yeah. Well, maybe just a quick one to wrap up on the trading. People looking to just get started, maybe some really obvious common mistakes that you see that maybe they should just consider before hooking into trading.
Yep. I think with trading, knowing how much grass you've got, so how many animals you can carry, knowing the season you're in and the type of grass you've got, so that you've got a reasonable estimate of what live weight gains will be. Another thing with trading is being able to have access to finance. So some of these are lessons that I've learnt myself. I think I've probably been told all of them before, but some things you need to learn. So at times we've been caught that we didn't have as much feed as we thought, that animals haven't grown as well as I thought they would. At times we've had feed, but we haven't had access to finance. We've already been fully drawn on facilities. So having access to finance, having feed, and then being able to have feed at any time, so that you're able to jump in when there's some really attractive trades happening. So I guess one of the things that we aim to have is having feed at the end of winter, so that sort of August, September. So historically, that's the lowest point in the market on a yearly cycle, of which if we're able to start buying before everyone else, before it starts raining.
That's a good point. Yeah, August, September. Yeah, that sounds exactly right.
However, with that, you need to know how much grass you've got, because if it doesn't rain and through till Christmas or through January or February, well, what are you going to do with those animals? So you need to be confident with how much feed you've got.
Yeah.
Then probably the other point with going into it, get some education around being able to do some spreadsheets.
Yes.
About, and recognizing that just because we did this trade this year doesn't mean that trade is always the best trade. Sometimes it might be a different class of animals, it might be an adjustment option, or it might be a profit share option.
Yeah. And that's something you guys can definitely help out with at RCS and Knowledge to Practice, all those type of things. Do minerals or supplements ever play a role in your operation during winter, or?
Yep. As if we look at winter supplementation, so looking at, we do from time to time use a urea base lick. With that, it will tend to be in a drier year rather than a wetter year. So if we're having a reasonable sort of season, we do have a lot of medics and clovers and vetches growing through this country. So the intake of supplement, of your urea protein supplement, is nowhere near as much through winter most years. So it's not something that we blanket do every year. And probably one of the things we do is just monitor manure. So if the manure starts stacking up, we'll be pretty quick to get some sort of protein lick out there, some sort of urea based lick. And then through as far as mineral licks go, from time to time we will, and we've played around with free choice minerals. We've also played around with a multi-mineral type mineral lick, and what we've found is because we've got a reasonable amount of diversity in our plants and also soil types here. Like it's not just all like some of it's scrub soil, some of it's black soil flat, some of it's sandier, lighter country, eucalypt country. So we find that, or we've found that because the mob is rotating through all of those paddocks, they're able to self-medicate and self get their supplement minerals through what they're browsing. From a nutrition point of view, generally it's through peak of summer, like at the moment. Peak summer, we got green grass, it's fresh, it's growing, protein is more than adequate, energy is more than adequate, so minerals will quite often be the limiting factor. So we've just had, it's been a fairly wet December, and so I haven't put minerals out. However, what I'm looking to do when I can see a bit of a gap that it's not going to be as wet, I'll this next week I'm looking to put some minerals out.
Yep.
And I'll be putting stuff out with extra sulfur for to help with parasites, so help with ticks and flies.
Is this country phosphorus deficient? Is it fine for phosphorus? It's all good.
Phosphorus is pretty good. Yep.
So what does the parasite situation look like? What's your biggest burden?
Flies. Yeah, buffalo flies. So with ticks, if we go back to daring days, so we were treating multiple times through summer for ticks, using porons just continuously. Once we started rotating and following the grazing principles through all of the paddocks, we were able to stretch out our rest period. And so we're having a definite effect on the tick cycle, and our tick burdens drop dramatically. So part of our induction protocol here is we'll do a backline for ticks and worms. And then if we need to, we'll do a tick treatment. But there's some years that we don't need to do a tick treatment.
Yeah. The rotations just seem to take care of the ticks.
Takes a big chunk out of it, yeah. And then just going with that diversity too, there are some paddocks here that have something growing in it that in some years I've seen, been shifting animals, and I can see a heap of baby seed ticks. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to come back to work my way back to the yards and do a treatment. And as I'm getting back closer to the yards, all of a sudden they've disappeared. So I think there's something out there somewhere that has something is growing that is having an effect, is a tickercide or a parasite control. But I haven't been able to work out what it is.
Which one it is.
Which one it is, what paddock it is. Yeah.
As soon as you do, you'll start selling these bloody tick trees.
I'll start having to have a little greenhouse and start propagating them. Yeah.
What do you think it is? Because I noticed the exact same thing. Like neighbours across the road, especially last year, they didn't. One big paddock, no rotations at all, full of ticks. And then I was doing mine once a day, never saw a tick. What do you think it is? Science-wise, that could be contributing
to the ticks. Yeah. So with the grazing, with getting rest. So, now the tick life cycle, I can't remember whether it's 21 days or 28 days, something like that. So, if we said it was 28 days, any time that our rest period is longer than 28 days, we're starting to have some sort of an effect on the tick cycle.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, that probably segues nicely into the next little section I just wanted to touch on, which was how you're actually managing the grazing events when cattle do come on. So say a mob does arrive, they get dropped off in the yards. Do you have some type of protocol treatment-wise, or breaking them into electric fence just to get them set up for your style of grazing?
Yep. Cattle get dropped off in the yards in our cooler. We've split that with a couple of hot wires, a couple of electric fences, and the idea with that is overnight or over a 24-hour period, everyone has either touched that or know someone who has touched that, so that you know, okay, well, electric fences, they are a thing here, and we make sure that that thing is hot for that initial induction. So for the first, they'll be in the yards, and so as far as a quarantine type period of what we do here, we've got a couple of little paddocks close to the yards that I'm wanting the animals to get onto grass as quick as they can. And quite often when I drop those animals into those little paddocks, I'll have I'm wanting to get the cross inoculation with some of the animals that have already been here. So they've already got the bugs, the appropriate bugs for the feed that's here. So quite often if I don't have some animals from the mob they're going to go to there straight away, after a few days when they go out to a mob, they'll go into a mob of animals that are already here, so that those animals can kind of teach them a little bit. Well, this is what we eat here. They're kissing and cuddling. They're swapping spit, so they're getting inoculated for the appropriate bugs, the rumen bugs, for the feed that they'll be eating here.
Yeah, awesome. I probably should have quickly touched on it, but maybe just briefly, how many mobs would you usually be rotating, and what do you categorize those mobs into?
Yep. So for a long period of time, so when we first started with dairying, we probably had somewhere 20 to 30 paddocks. In the last 20 years, we bought a couple of extra blocks, and we're about just over 60 paddocks now. And for a big chunk of the time, the last sort of 20 odd years, we've tended to have a single mob for most of the time. However, with that, we found that the smaller animals just sat there for a long period of time. So what I'm more inclined to do these days, the last couple of years, is split the mob. So we'll tend to have a mob of smalls, so they might be up to about 300 kilos, thereabouts, and then we'll have the main mob, which would take them through to the 3 to 400 plus kilos, and to be sold. Sometimes we might have a third mob of the ones that we'll draft off, like to make up a couple of deck loads that they'll just rotate for a bit on their own until they're sold as well.
Yes.
And then it just depends whether we're doing any profit share or adjustment. Sometimes those animals, depending on their weight range, whether they fit in nicely with animals we've already got, or whether they'll be a separate mob. But we're talking about being peak summer at the moment. Like grass is growing inches a day. It's really powering. As soon as that starts slowing down, we'll just start slowing the moves down as well. When we have multiple mobs, like, we don't necessarily go, okay, this mob is small, so they'll just rotate around these paddocks. The main mob will rotate around this other part of the place, and then the third mob somewhere else. They're nearly following each other because we've got such diverse country. We're wanting each mob to pick up on the different plants or the different soil types throughout the entire place, so they all have a crack at that sometime.
Yes.
Over summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then if we have a look at what we get through, we go through summer. It starts cooling down. Grass is growing much slower. We'll slow the moves up, and then we do a feed budget around Anzac Day, somewhere there, so that even if we have rain after Anzac Day, we're not going to grow a big bulk of grass. So therefore, the grass we've got is the grass we've got, and we'll aim to do about 2 laps through everything, through
over winter,
through till through till December.
Yes.
Yeah, mid-December, sometime then. Yeah.
I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into how you've actually got the infrastructure laid out to facilitate this type of grazing, and given that your property is quite undulating, I think it'll also answer a question that we got sent in on the Grazing Game Show, which was from Sarah up in Jaringa, Central Queensland, and she wondered if we could talk on the show a little bit about how to install, manage paddock divisions in hilly country. So, would you have any advice around that, and any thoughts, any materials?
Okay. So I guess our original infrastructure that we had here coming out of dairying, we already had 20 to 30 paddocks thereabouts, and so we used the paddocks that we already had. The other thing, we did have a reasonable number of laneways through it all, and like the laneways were there to be able to have paddocks, have the cows in a paddock. They can walk through the laneway back to the dairy, because they needed to come back to the dairy twice a day, every single day of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, while it made shifting animals easy, it also meant that a lot of they were grazing in a paddock, and then they were pooing and peeing up these laneways. So we had these high nutrient laneways, and all that manure concentrated, whereas we want that out in the paddock where it's grazing. So one of the first things we did, while I said we didn't really change anything from our dairying days, we did pull one side of laneways, a lot of our laneways out. Actually, we don't have any laneways anymore, so that the laneway becomes part of the paddock. Then so I guess that's sort of what we inherited after multi generations
of
dairy. Yeah. So as we've bought extra blocks, then we've tended to some of the blocks have been the infrastructure was quite tired, and so rather than trying to fix up what was there, we just took it as a blank canvas and then just went from there. Mm-hmm. Water is water infrastructure to start with. It's you're wanting to get that right. You're wanting to get that in the right place. It's the most expensive, and what we've with any of these new blocks, we've tended to go hard and get the infrastructure in, so that we can start utilising that country as quick as we can, because we're wanting to make a return on that. Mm-hmm. So with water, we've aimed to get 2 litres a second to each trough. That's one of the RCS recommendations, and that's for mobs up to 800 head.
Mobs up to 800.
Yeah, 800. They're about, so biggish sort of mobs.
Yeah. Is there a standard or recommended pipe size you reckon people should just aim for, and skip going too small?
The bigger the better. That's really it comes down to your topography.
Yep.
And then also whether you've got a single pipeline or whether you've got a loop system. So with us, because we do have a fair bit of elevation in the country, we have a fair bit of pressure, and for most of our paddocks, probably 90% of them, we've got good flow rates to those trough. There's only a couple that we don't have as good, and with that's just part of something that we're aware of with our grazing management. So any heat waves that come through, any hotter, while forecast can be a bit hit and miss as far as rain goes, heat waves are pretty accurate. So we've got a heads up before a heat wave comes, and so I'll tend to, if the mob is going into some of those paddocks where the flow rate isn't as good, I'll just avoid those paddocks for that week. And then same with trees in paddocks. Some of our paddocks, they're old cropping paddocks, so there are no trees, and so I'll avoid those paddocks during those hot periods. Yeah. So looking at infrastructure, then we've got our waters in, be able to get that in. As we've been able to go, it's been like, you always hear people talk about wanting to have a ring system with your pipes, to be able to have water flowing to each trough 2 directions. And it wasn't until we were able to buy one of the missing pieces one of the missing blocks, that we were able to complete a loop. And like pumping efficiency is so much better, not just from the flow rate to the troughs, but all of those things. It all really pays for it itself to be able to do that.
That's the loop.
Yep. Having a loop system,
Yep.
Yeah. So rather than just single pipe that it's going in one direction, it's coming from two ways. Yeah.
And what would your most common fencing setup be for all your paddock divisions going over this type of terrain?
So here with single hot wire, because we are a bit hilly and we go up and down, and there's old contour banks through some paddocks. We tend to go a little bit higher than rather than a little bit lower. When we're budgeting, or when we're putting fences out, we're probably about 20-25 metres apart. Steel pegs, single insulator, porcelain one mostly. Occasionally it's plastic. However, when we're budgeting, I'll do the budget on about 15 metres, because I know that as we're going through gullies or different things, we're going to use a heap more.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that'd probably. I hope that helps, Sarah. Yeah. No, that seems to be like in one of the most economical and effective ways. Have you, you know how big your energizer is that pumps around the property?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. It's
big mother.
Yeah, big. It's on 240 volt. Yeah,
it'll get you.
It'll get you. Yeah. Having plenty of switches in the line, especially like I think having your energizer wherever it is. If you can have a couple of switches right there at your energizer, is a really good point. Just so that you can isolate different sections of your place to be able to troubleshoot where there are leaks, and then also if there are leaks and there's no animals in there, well, you can just turn that off. Everything is still really hot, and then you can go and work out where the issue is to fix it. Yeah.
That's a really great tip. Are there any tools or pieces of equipment, if you had to pick one, actually, if you could pick one piece of equipment or a tool that you couldn't live without in your grazing operation, what do you reckon it would be? What do you find yourself using most of the time?
Ooh. What comes to mind initially is being able to have something to shift animals. Yeah. So having a bike or a quad to be able to get out there and shift animals, because I'm doing it every day. Sometimes I'm doing it twice a day. So it's, to be able to jump on that, like that's where I'm making money, having animals going into fresh paddocks.
Yeah.
Going out there, riding through paddocks, seeing what grass is doing. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. That's a really great tip that I followed at the very start of my grazing journey. I was following a bloke on from over in the States, and he was constantly saying, oh no, look, don't spend your money on any of that type of stuff, the motorbikes. Everything should be allocated towards a cow that appreciates. And I wish that a quad bike was the first thing I bought, that I could stick my tread-in post on a quad bike, my reels, rather than trudging around in the love grass and the long grass, spending 6 times longer getting the same job done. So if I could go back, that would be one of the first things I would do, is even if it was secondhand as well, even if it was a secondhand $2,000-$3,000 quad bike, I wish I just invested it.
Yeah. Probably the other thing then, the other bit of the tool, or bit of equipment, or that type of thing that I couldn't live without is, especially during dry years, is just being able to have that grazing chart. Being able to monitor. Like the grazing chart gives me a heads up about what's happening. Sometimes it gives you a heads up before it happens. Sometimes it only shows up after the fact. But being able to have some way of being able to monitor what's going on, but you need to also be out in the paddock, which is where the bike comes into it. Be able to go around and see what's happening, and not just happening where the mob is at the moment, but the other paddocks where they're going to be going into, the paddocks that they've come out of, to see, okay, well, how's that growing? How's that responding?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. You're able to do that.
Mm.
Oh, thanks so much for sitting down with me. I appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you guys if they want to follow along? Do you want to talk a little bit about your new business, Knowledge to Practice?
Yep. So our new business, Knowledge to Practice, it's there's a couple of aspects to it, and it's kind of a natural progression or natural evolution of some of the things Katie and I have been doing. So Katie, for her entire working life, has been a physiotherapist and has just sold her physio practice. But at the same time, she's been working with people and doing coaching in the health and wellness space, and also doing a number of women's workshop type events. So with her selling her physio practice, and then some of the things I've been doing with RCS for a long period of time, I'm still working with RCS, still teaching there. We've come up with this new business, Knowledge to Practice, and we one of the main things that we are doing with that is working with small landholders. So small landholders, hobby farmers, quite often first generation farmers, that having a space or we actually run a boot camp here on farm, so that people can come along, ask questions. I've got we've got 20 acres. How many cows can I have? What can I do? So how do I set up some fences? How do I fix a fence? I've got a leaky pipe. How can I do that? So some practical things, but then also some foundations, just things that I think a lot of us who have been on the land all our lives don't realise that we know.
Yeah.
That just a space to ask those questions. So you can find us on the website. You'll have the
I'll put all the links and everything in the show notes as well. But where can they find online? Yeah,
so Knowledge to Practice. Knowledge to Practice, and Google is starting to work a bit better. So Knowledge to Practice, and if you put Zerner, either Andrew or Katie Zerner, Knowledge to Practice, it'll come up.
Yep. Yes. Awesome.
And then some of the other things, still working for RCS.
Yes.
RCS courses are fantastic. Looking at grazing, getting some foundations there, and then with trading, we've talked a lot about trading. So KLR, I'd highly recommend them as well. Just being able to get your head around some of those trading paradigms. Yep.
No, awesome. Well, I did the 3-day course with you. Maybe 3 years ago now.
It's a few years ago now.
Years ago now, and I highly rate it. We came out to your place and had a look around, and learnt a lot. I've still got my book that I took all the notes in, and it's really interesting. Well, that's about it for this episode, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks again, Andrew.
More than welcome, Cam. Thank you.